Well, it's a pleasure to be here today with you, and I can tell you that throughout a career, it's kind of like a trail of breadcrumbs in a way. There's always these pivotal, sort of transformational moments within a career that sort of form your next period of time before you hit the next breadcrumb. We've all experienced it, right? What led us all into medicine, first and foremost, it was usually something pivotal at some point in our trajectory, making it into college and making it through the coursework, deciding to do pre-med, and then deciding to march into medicine. And then, of course, during the course of medical school, finding that next crumb that really led you into emergency medicine. Perhaps it started before with an EMS background. For me, it came sort of towards the tail end of third year when I decided I liked components of every rotation, but didn't like any rotation specifically. And then there's those threads, those crumbs that led us into academics. And those crumbs just kind of keep on coming along throughout a career. And you can kind of look back and reflect on those pivotal crumbs. And I'll tell you that one of the most important crumbs in my life was when I started a leadership course that was hosted by our healthcare system. So our healthcare system decided that there weren't that many physician leaders. There were a lot of non-physician leaders. And they really wanted to build up the slate of physician leaders within the organization. And so they partnered with one of the business schools on the Eastern Seaboard and decided to put together this leadership course. And so we had a lot of lectures and presentations done by professors from business school. MBAs, really, they deal with all sorts of different industries, a little bit with healthcare here and there, but it was an absolutely eye-opening experience. My first observation, wow, I've dealt with some really, really crummy bosses in my time. When you hear how things should occur and how things often occur in the trenches, not exactly a great lineup. And so it got me thinking, are there things that we all could be doing as leaders in education within emergency medicine so we can actually draw on best practices from other industries where they study this stuff and they look at this stuff all the time. So that is essentially the crumb and the nidus for this talk on academic leadership. Now, when you look at the title, I'm big into titles and what does the title actually mean? So you look at academics, and it doesn't matter if you're in emergency medicine or you're an academic surgeon or, for that matter, an academic biochemist, a foundational science, or perhaps a physicist or something that has nothing to do with medicine per se. Academics is academics is academics. So it really does cross disciplines, and then we know it certainly crosses medical specialties. And you look at the term leadership, it really crosses domains. Leadership is so incredibly important in so many things. You look at the military. You look at the aviation industry. You look at any major industry out there, leadership is key. And it's something that's spoken about and written about, and there's tons and tons of information out there. So what are the basic definitions? And I always like the kindergarten approach to everything. You know, what is it that we can say about academics? Everything I need to know I learned in grade K, and I can certainly tell you, as we all can, that academics will fill any volume of space given to it. We all know that. So it's important to kind of have some regulators in the system. We'll talk about that. But leadership, foundational, we learned this when we were all in grade school, when we were on any type of team sport. And that is what our coaches told us. There is no I in team. So in sum and in conclusion, I will say that academic leadership is just those two things. So obviously we have a lot of ground to cover between points A and B. Let's further frame this. And I can tell you, just flip on the news and you will see that there are leadership opportunities all around us. We've all seen the United Airlines incident, and incidentally, if this ever occurs in your residency program, that's never a good thing. Don't violently pull someone out of conference. Never, never a good thing. So we know leadership opportunities are there. And what would you say the sort of the foundational leadership messages in this? In the night that this came out, I remember watching the news with my wife, and I'm like, this is fascinating. what has United Airlines done? I got nothing against United Airlines, and I have no stake or interest in any other airline, so this is a non-biased comment. But what is it? What does this world come to? And when you really look at it, we said this, my wife and I together, that night when it occurred, that company has really lost sight of their constituents. They're in the business of providing service and transporting people in a very upstanding way from destination to destination. What have we come to when we're taking people off of airplanes? So we know that these opportunities are out there. So what are our goals and objectives for the next 2 hours? Of course, 50 minutes. I know I'm competing with weather. So our goal, useful pearls, avoidable pitfalls, foundational to effective leadership in academics. And our specific objectives during the next 45 minutes now are to build and engage an academic team. Because all leadership begins with having a team, and a strong team, and a team that works well together. We'll talk about managing that team, leading a committee, and running a meeting. Because I can tell you one of the most important things that we do, anyone here ever have to sit in meetings any day of the week? Perhaps your PEC meeting, perhaps your CCC meeting, perhaps your program leadership meeting, perhaps the chief's meeting, perhaps the program management meeting, perhaps hospital meetings, dean's office meetings. Meetings are all around us, and no one ever taught us, as leaders and emerging leaders in our specialty, how to run a meeting. We'll talk about affecting positive change. Change is tough. It's tough for everybody. Change is tough on me. I don't like change. But if there's one constant that's out there, it's change. The one thing you can count on in 2017 and moving forward is change. So how to affect positive change, how to move groups and teams through that process. And we'll also talk and just sort of hint on the concept of emotional intelligence, EQ. Who here has ever heard of EI or EQ? So about half the hands, maybe more. So it's getting more and more press these days. It's certainly something that's in the business literature. It's spoken about frequently. This is what CEOs of major Fortune 500 companies talk about all the time. Emotional intelligence, very, very important thing. So here's our roadmap for meeting our goals and objectives. We're going to get back to those foundational definitions. We're not going to drop the mic that early. And we're going to talk about how you get started. Because being a leader, you need to have street cred yourself. So you need to be able to walk the walk before you can talk the talk. And we'll talk about how to build your CV to do that. And then we're going to talk about really what is important about leadership is not you anymore. It's about everyone else that you work with. It's how do you create synergy? How do you make the team operate more efficiently than 1 member plus 1 member plus 1 member plus 1 member equals 4? How do you make that team of 4 work like a team of 10? That's a really important principle, and we'll talk about it specifically in regards to leading committees and affecting positive change, and then we'll round it out with a top 10 list. Pearls and pitfalls from my experience, shared experiences of others. So let's get back to our definitions. Academic leadership. We all know, as said before, academics will fill any volume of space given to it. But really, what is academics? It crosses disciplines, crosses domains, it crosses medical specialties. Academics, at the end of the day, is peer review and it's scholarship. Fortunately, many of our promotion and tenure committees, although there's not much tenure out there anymore in emergency medicine, it's mostly appointments and promotions for academics at medical schools. Fortunately, they look at all these things. It used to be just the bottom rung of this ladder, when you had discovery, bench or bedside, peer-reviewed, the gold standard in clinical research to have these randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. Kind of hard to accomplish that when you're trying to manage a residency or manage a clerkship at the same time. So that definition has really been blown out and expanded. But at the end of the day, all of these components, whether it's teaching, whether it's getting involved at the national level, whether it's integrating and synthesizing book chapters, monographs, all these other opportunities that are out there, it all is evaluated by others. And so that's really the one thread that pulls us together. So an important thing for all of us to do to be an academic leader, to build that street cred ourselves. Now, what is leadership? Leadership is beyond there's no I in team. And thinking about those breadcrumbs that I referred to before, a really important breadcrumb occurred to me about my second or third year out of residency. I was meeting with my chair at the time, Mark Smith, great mentor, great advisor, always pushing the envelope and got you thinking critically about yourself and what you were doing and trying to get you to that next step. And I prepared for my annual review with my academic chair. Was an assistant professor at the time, was hoping to be an associate professor in a couple of years from that point. Prepared my form of all the stuff I was doing, speaking, writing, teaching, all this great stuff. I was very proud of it. It certainly filled every bit of that volume of space I gave to it. Very proud. I show up at his office, sat down, we spoke for about an hour. He said, "You're doing all this great stuff." And I'm like, high five to myself quietly. "I'll leave. We should be good for the next year." He said, "Before you go, I want to talk to you about something else." He said, "We're a brand new residency program. And we just started around that time, our training program. It's like, we got a lot of junior faculty members." He's like, "You're doing a great job." He's like, "That's fine and dandy." He's like, "How are you going to elevate the game of those around you? How are you going to share your special sauce? Whatever you have found to make yourself successful, it's great. I'm proud of you. But that's not going to work for you for the next 5 or 10 years. You have to teach others how to be similarly successful." And it really was one of those crumbs that I'll never forget. Because academics, it really is no longer about you. And leadership in academics, it really is no longer about you. It's about elevating the game of the team. So it's that power of synergy, and we're going to talk more about that. Always know that others are taking note. By virtue of sitting in this room, let me stop there. By virtue of being a physician, you are a leader. You don't need to be in academics. If you're taking care of patients, you show up in the ward, you show up in the ED, people are looking to you for leadership. The entire team around you. So that means if you show up in a really crappy mood and you throw charts on the floor, or you have a difficult conversation with a consultant and you hang up the phone and say that a-hole on the other end of the line, everyone is watching your lead. And you know something, as a leader, you're tacitly endorsing that behavior. Always keep that in mind. When you're teaching, when you're leading, everyone is watching your every move. So lead by the example. Be the boss that you would want to have. Would you want to see the person that you put all of your eggs in their basket, who behaved in a way and you look, say, "I don't know if I'd want to be like that when I'm at their stage." Always think about that. No matter how junior you are, no matter where you are in your trajectory, you are a leader, and you need to set the example. Along those lines, teach by example. Others are watching you, and they want to be taught in the same way that you would want to be taught. So when you channel back to medical school and those really awful rotations, 16-hour surgery, let's say, and you're getting pimped, and you're just tired, and you're fatigued, and all those bad things, and it didn't make you feel great. If you're treating one of your students the same way, or one of your learners, one of your residents, as a faculty physician, or as a senior resident dealing with a junior resident, that is not how they want to be taught either. So always think in that frame. So academic leadership is really creating synergy in all of these domains that are important to scholarship, in finding ways to make 1 + 1 equal many more than 2. But as I mentioned at the beginning, your street cred is super important, because everything begins with you as an individual. It's hard to lead if you haven't walked the walk yourself. So building success in academics, this is what I felt like as a junior faculty member. Man, where do I even get started? How do I look for opportunities? I would love to speak at a major national conference. I'd love to write a textbook chapter. Who selects these folks to write a chapter for Tinton Alley and Rosen? How can I be one of those folks? How can you find those type of opportunities? And I would say leading by example is just a matter of getting involved. By virtue of being here at Court, by virtue of joining other major national organizations in our specialty, sitting out there by the water cooler, so to speak, you're networking. You're collaborating. You're meeting people. And you can take it a step further by joining committees. And this isn't a plug for core committees, although it could be seen that way. Join committees. Get involved with things. That's how you really meet people. So speaking, writing opportunities, but most importantly, networking opportunities, which feed right back on those other chances to do things. I've been very involved with SAEM and their GME committee. I can tell you the number of publications that churn out from that committee in one way, shape, or form, it's absolutely astounding. And as a junior member of that committee, you're often paired with a senior member of the committee, and all of a sudden you have a publication to your name. Might not be a PubMed ID, but at least it's a foundation and it gets your name out there and it leads to other opportunities. So getting the word out, and my good friend, Dr. Jay Ufberg, everyone here knows Dr. Ufberg from Temple University, he always talks about the ABCs of academics. Always be completing. You don't want to pick up something, sign on for something, and not carry through. Worst possible scenario. Slow and steady wins the race. Pick up things that you know you can achieve, and make sure you achieve them and do them well. As I said at the beginning, academics truly will fill any volume of space given to it. But you want to be careful to not overextend. Because overextension, it's kind of like that Starling curve. You start operating on the far end of that Starling curve where you're no longer as efficient as you could be. So a general rule is that you need 3 good reasons to say yes, but only 1 so-so reason to say, probably not the right time. But there's a couple important caveats to that. First and foremost, you never know when serendipity will strike. And I always use the example, and many of you have probably heard me say this before, but I can tell you that I became a full professor at Georgetown on the heels of male genitourinary emergencies. Now, I did not select that content area. The content area selected me in the form of an assigned talk during my second year of residency, and I know we have some Stanford folks here. Dr. Gus Garmel was our APD at the time, had a list, 36 content areas that needed to be covered in the next academic year. Please rank order them 1 through 36. I figured I'm good. I'm definitely going to get like 1 through 12 or maybe my 15th choice. I got my 35th of 36 choices. Male genitourinary emergencies. I'm like, this is fantastic. So I put together a talk on male GU. I gave the talk at our lecture series. At the end of it, I wiped the sweat from my brow, and I'm like, I never have to give that talk again. Thank goodness. Well, there's an internal medicine resident who was rotating in the ED who happened to be at that conference, and they said, that would be really, really helpful for our group. Because we deal with this all the time, and frankly, we don't know when these folks walk into our clinic when to call urology. And we've had urologists come and speak about it, but it's very focused on once the urologist is called. This is helpful from an all-comers perspective. Would you mind come give this talk at our noon conference series? And I'm like, namaste moment. I've already put in the academic investment. I've already developed this lecture, got all the slides. Interesting story about when I got those slides digitized, though. I almost got arrested at a moto photo. I figured I had already put the talk together. I might as well give it to the IM. Sure enough, true story. There was a pediatric resident who was IM Peds, who was at the IM lecture. And they said, bingo, this is great for pediatrics as well. Next thing you know, you fast forward 15 years, basically most of my CV is male genitourinary emergencies. And if I didn't embrace serendipity, I would have never have had those opportunities. So be careful when you say no. And it brings up a second point. Dr. Glenn Hamilton, Wright State University, often referred to as the father, we called him the grandfather once, and he got very, very upset. But the father of faculty development in emergency medicine always talks about parlaying, and parlaying. You're doing the literature review. You're putting in that academic investment. You might as well get as much return out of that investment as possible. Another important quote comes from one of the senior clinicians in our group. He sat me down my very first year, and he does a lot of teaching, but he's not really like an academic guy per se, by his own admission. But he always wins teaching awards and accolades from the students for his great teaching abilities. Just an in-the-trenches, amazing person, amazing teacher. And I said, John, what's your advice? Starting out, just joined this group, moved here from the Bay Area to D.C. He goes, I've seen a lot of people come and go in my time. He's like, the one thing I notice with the people that stay, the people that are productive, they find a way to make themselves invaluable to the system. So when times are lean and they're looking at the roster, that's the one person that they know they can't get rid of. And he's kind of a negative guy. He's very pessimistic and always looking about when he's going to get chopped and cut. I see my colleague smiling back there. It's the truth. Basically that's what the advice he gave. Fantastic advice. And advice that I've given so many times over with attribution to John. Make yourself invaluable to your system. A great way to be productive. So this is my take on navigating the academic waters. Certainly what a career in emergency medicine feels like at times. So now let's talk about synergy. We talked about you developing your street cred, getting your name out there, looking for opportunities, being productive, parlaying, embracing serendipity. Now let's talk about your impact on others. Because leadership is really all about your impact on others. It was that crumb that I was given 2 to 3 years out of residency. That's wonderful. You keep on achieving, but how are you going to help my faculty group do the same? So we'll talk specifically about leading a committee, running a meeting, and then also affecting positive change at your shop. Who here has ever received an email that really just pissed them off? If you aren't raising your thank you, like everyone can raise their hand to that. There is a way to go about change predicated on hours and hours and hours of social sciences research, mostly from the business realm, and oftentimes that is not carried through. So we're going to hit on that. So committees and meetings, fundamental skill and an expectation. If you're an APD, if you're a clerkship director, if you're an assistant clerkship director, if you're a chief resident, if you are a junior resident who is leading some type of task force or group within your program, you need to hold a meeting at some point. Tremendous impact on you and your team's ability to excel and succeed, but no one ever taught us how to do this. I personally have never had a course on running a meeting. And I've been to many meetings where, you can actually like YouTube bad meeting, and there's a lot of really funny videos out there about people like what they're actually doing when they're on that conference call. But no one ever taught us this. So what are the core themes? Effective leadership, prep and follow-up are as important, if not important, more important than the thread of the meeting itself. I used to think of meetings, whether I was a participant or a leader of a meeting, where you just show up and like, oh, there's food over there, let's grab some coffee, let's chit-chat a little bit, we got an hour meeting, we're done, good to go. In, out, targeted, done. That's the worst way to run a meeting. All of the work of a meeting comes before. The meeting itself is largely a formality if the pre-work's been done, and then all of the follow-up to actually move the meter forward in terms of acting on what you set forth to accomplish during the meeting itself. Another general theme. Who here has ever been at a meeting where they just sat there and listened to someone speak for hours, perhaps hours and hours, and never had a chance to give their input? Why have a meeting? Right? The purpose of a meeting in building a team is to get input and perspectives that will frame where you're going to move the meter. So I think an important closing ritual, if you will, and we'll talk further about this, is giving everyone a voice. We have a tradition at our residency. Every single meeting we have, at the end of it, we go around the horn. Program coordinator, program manager, residents that are in the room, everyone that's in the room has a chance to have a voice. It might not be something that we can unearth and cover in the last 2 minutes of a meeting, but at least it's something that we'll think about and consider putting on the agenda for the next time. And you as the leader, whether it's PEC, CCC, another residency meeting, student meeting, meeting among your colleagues, your residents, you need to set the example. If you're late, tacit endorsement of everyone can be late. If you're on your cell phone, checking texts and hammering out other things, trying to be efficient, that sets the example that no one really needs to pay attention. Why have a meeting? It's important to set the tone, set the example. So having a plan, advanced preparation, again, often more important than the meeting itself. Identify the key participants. Now, this is a tricky one. Sometimes you want the boss there, but other times you don't, right? And it all depends on what the goal of the meeting is. And I think it's a very important thing to look at. At the end of the day, we all have a lot of things that we could be doing. Some of those things are in academics. Some of those things are working out and exercising, taking care of life tasks, going out with our significant others, taking care of our children. There's many things that we could be doing. Whenever you're going to put a meeting on the agenda, think to yourself, what's the purpose of this? What is our goal? What's the outcome that we're looking at? Why are we investing time? Because if you have 10 people in a room for 1 hour, that's 10 person hours of time. That's a lot of time, a lot of productivity. And think about what the outcome's going to be, what the anticipated goal is. And it's important to look at the key stakeholders and decision makers. Let's say you're looking to enact a change, and at the end of the day, the ultimate decision maker is going to be responsible for saying yay or nay on that. It might be a good idea to have them there, to hear the input, to hear the perspectives, and that way you can actually have a decision at the end of that 10 person hour investment, as opposed to then having another meeting to figure out, is this going to move forward? Conversely, if you're more in like the storming, forming phase where you want to come up with a proposal for the boss, but you're not quite there yet and you need to kind of work through the process of making sure everyone's on the same page, probably not a good idea of having the ultimate decision maker present, because you might lose a lot of street cred in the process. These people don't know what they're talking about here. They don't know what they want to do. There's no way I'm going to invest money in that for the residency, for the clerkship. So think about what the ultimate purpose is. Sending the invitation. Pre-assignment of tasks. I had a meeting earlier today. David Barnes and I sat down. We were talking about the SAEM GME committee. I'm stepping down as chair of the GME committee. David's coming on. And we had to talk about what's the best way to engage our group. We have 50 members of the SAEM GME committee. And I don't know about you, but has anyone ever been in a place where there's a meeting going on and the chair of the meeting or whoever's speaking says, all right, who's going to volunteer for this? And everyone's looking down, they're checking their phone, they're trying to don't make eye contact, because I might get called on. But it happens all the time. I'm guilty of that all the time myself. Because all of a sudden it gives you that anxiety boost, and you're like, I don't know if I have the time for this or not, and I need some time to process it and think about it before I make a decision. What pre-assignment of tasks does is it gives that processing time. It allows people to take 24 hours. Think about it. Which is the right thing that for me and what I want to do and how I can best contribute? What's my skill set? And so what we did for the SAEM GME committee the last few years is we actually sent around an email. We sent around a Google poll. It was just a Google form that we created, and we had 4 objectives. And on that poll, it said, what's your first choice? What's your second choice? What's your third choice? And by the way, if there's something that's so offensive and you have no interest in working on it, let us know about that as well. Because we'll make sure that we don't assign you to something that is not an interest area. And I was very concerned in first sending this out, like how many responses out of 50 are we going to get? We actually had like 48 to 50 people respond. And everyone got their first or second choice. No one got something that they weren't interested in. And so when we sat down for a meeting in New Orleans, we already had the first half hour covered with no anxiety. So we can actually start working on moving the meter on those objectives. So it can be a very, very helpful thing to do at your shop, at your home, in terms of making meetings more effective. Pre-assignment of tasks. Now, executing a meeting. There's a lot of preparation that goes in, the immediate peri-meeting prep. I told you it's a process, it's a spectrum. That's a theme that you're going to start seeing, not only with meetings, but also with managing change. It is not just a quick email. That undoubtedly will piss a lot of people off. It is a process. It's important to look at that process. Another thing I found hugely, hugely helpful. One of my biggest pet peeves, I spent the first 14 years of my career in academic emergency medicine going to meetings, whether it's at CORD, SAEM, ACEP, or others, spending half of my meeting time, and I told you how important networking is to your street cred, trying to figure out who these people in the room were. I knew who the chair was. They were speaking, but there were all these other big names on there, and I'm like, who was who? Was that David House that just spoke? I don't know what he looks like. And I didn't want to be on the grid and trying to Google everyone. And so we actually started doing the last few meetings, started creating a face sheet. Super easy to do. And I warn people in advance. Send a headshot of yourself. If you don't, that's great, but one will be selected for you. And there are a lot of similar names. I'm telling you, Google Jonathan Davis, you'll get the lead singer from the group Korn from the 1990s. So it's a great way of sharing bios. For the ACEP Educational Meetings Committee, not only did we send out photos, we actually sent bios. What are we doing? We were creating the content of the educational program for ACEP 17. It is helpful to know when someone has an EMS background. Just with photos or just with names, I don't necessarily know that. There's 20 people on that committee. So we actually ask for a bio. Where are you working? Where have you worked in the past? What are your interest areas? What are your strengths? And what subspecialty certification do you have? Very, very helpful in providing that information for the group. So the process of leading a meeting, start on time. And again, that last parting measure going around the horn. Make sure everyone has a voice. What do you do if someone says, I actually have a very contentious, inflammatory item? They don't paraphrase it that way. That I'd like to just throw out there in the last 30 seconds. Approach. Great point. Let's hold that for the next meeting. And it gives you time to process and digest. And at least you know what the group is thinking. And you need to cover it. You need to address it. If it's important enough for someone to stand up and make themselves vulnerable to bring it up, it needs to be addressed. But at least it's an agenda item for the next meeting, and maybe creating a task force or a small group. My entire group will tell you I'm a big fan of subcommittees. It annoys everyone. Let's form these task forces to really look at things and delve in. Post-meeting follow-up. Actively managing that process. The time to do your post-meeting follow-up is not the hour before the next scheduled meeting. Stuff needs to occur. Again, meetings are a process. The actual meeting itself, a tiny fractal in that spectrum. Make sure things are actually happening. Identify leaders. Identify those who are going to be working on various tasks and check in with them. Say, what resources can I provide to help make you more successful in what you're doing? As a leader, you don't want to necessarily take it over, but you want to remove barriers, provide tools, synergy, so others can be successful. So we'll switch gears a little bit. Same concepts. We'll talk about affecting positive change at your shop. So what is change? I'll be the first to tell you. Change makes me very anxious and antsy. I don't like it. I like to roll the same way, do the same things. Even like my wife renovating the bathroom makes me very, very anxious. I don't know if I'm going to like the new tiles. I have my thing. When I get up early for a day shift, I'm not a big morning person. I know where everything is. I like things the way they are. So change is tough. Actively managing that process is key. Because we've all received that email with no pre-vetting and nothing afterwards about a change that's being enacted in the program or the clerkship or the department or the hospital. It takes you a minute to digest. And they've actually done a lot of work in the business realm to look at this. And it's the same thing as meetings. Change is not an email. Change is a process. And it's trying to move a team, move a group through that process. And never underestimate the impact on a team, impact on individuals, collateral damage, and impacts. Utilizing the heads-up method. What does that mean? You look at Harvard Business Review. I'd heard of Harvard Business Review, but never looked at anything. I figured, what does this have to do with medicine? I can't get CME credits from Harvard Business Review. But I can tell you in that one crumb, which was a really important crumb for me, getting involved with the leadership course, I look at Harvard Business Review all the time. Great articles, no stake in the company, but I can tell you it's very powerful stuff, and it's applicable to our space as well, to healthcare. Because leadership is leadership is leadership. So the change process, you can see it's an 8-point process as outlined by John Kotter, social scientist out of Boston. This is not an email. This is a process of creating a sense of urgency. Why do we actually have to change? You have to get people to buy into that process, form a guiding coalition, creating a vision, communicating that vision, empowering others to act, creating quick wins. All of this is part of that process. So change management, number one, overcoming that initial resistance. The physiologic response to change is anxiety. New rotation, change in the evaluation process, whatever it is, great opportunity to get a group of residents together and say, whatever we're doing right now is not working. Our faculty aren't happy with the evaluations. Our residents aren't happy completing the evaluations. We know where we need to get. What's your input? What do you think about this? What's a way that we can do this better? Get faculty together. Ask the same question. All of a sudden, you're making it a process with buy-in and engagement as opposed to an email that goes out. We've thought about it as the grand leadership of the program, and this is what we are enacting. It's like Game of Thrones, right? It doesn't occur that way in reality. So the key question is really, what's the worst that can happen? I ask this question all the time. You know, I have 2 kids, wonderful, wonderful kids, 11 years old, 8 years old, both very, very anxious. My wife and I just bat our heads on the wall. We have no idea where it comes from. So oftentimes questions come up from the back of the car, and I relay this one story. We're on I-495, the Capitol Beltway. My daughter, who's older, knocks my son on the shoulder and says, "Hey, look at the gas gauge. Daddy's got 1/8 of a tank." So my son is 7 years old, 6 at the time. He's like, "We're going to run out of gas. Like, what are you doing? You got to pull over. I cannot believe you would put me and my sister and your wife, mommy, in harm's way by driving around with 1/8 of a tank of gas." So I'm like, this is a great opportunity, kids, right? What's the worst that can happen? I said, let's play our way through this. What happens if daddy runs out of gas? My daughter's like, well, I guess we'd pull over on the side of the road. I'm like, precisely. And I'm like, if we had to pull over on the side of the road on the highway, which side of the car would we get out on? And they're like, we'd get out on Matthew's side. We'd get out on that side so we didn't walk into traffic. I'm like, exactly. And then what will we do? Well, I guess you have that AAA thing. We could call them. And I'm like, good. And what if AAA wasn't available? What if daddy's cell phone was out of power? Well, I guess we could flag someone down to help us. So I'm like, good. There's actually looking at this worst case scenario. And when we went through this in just a 2-minute period, they're like, it's not so bad. You can drive with 1/8 of the tank. We're fine going to the mall. We're good. But just going through that process, and when you think about that process for anything that you do with your program and with your shop, it's the same exact principles apply. And allow one of the other musicians to come up, do their solo instrumental. They would move back to their place, and he would thank them. And then he would move to the side. The drummer would do their solo, and he would thank them. And it went on and through all the musicians that were in the band. Dave Matthews was really teeing up others for success. And we actually had a rich conversation, the CMO and I, about bands and relating leadership examples. And he talked about the Rolling Stones. And a lot of these bands that stay together, they look out for one another. So you can see the group here, teeing up others for success. Super, super important. Lesson number 3, open door, open dialogue. Now, I don't know about you, but one of the things that drew me to emergency medicine is I'm not a very good listener. A lot of us tend to be in that boat. Effective listening can be tough for us that have self-selected for the specialty of emergency medicine. But with that said, one of the most important things that you can do as a leader is listen. And not just try to hit the check boxes. Try to actually come up with good solutions. Resist the urge to hyper-reply to email. I've been on a chairlift at a ski resort. I get an email that gives me that zing. I'm going to reply to this right away. And I stop. I pause. Namaste. There are very few emails that need a reply within minutes. Think about it. Especially if it's that email that's going to piss other people off. Make sure that you embargo yourself before you hit the reply button. Identify and alleviate pain points. Now, when I look at pain points, what exactly does that mean? That's a lesson that came from one of the business school professors. They talked about in business, what you want to do for your customers, you want to remove their pain points. You know, like Uber, great solution to a problem. A pain point, where am I going to get a taxi? We were at a restaurant last night, thanks again, in Fort Lauderdale. How's the taxi going to come? Oh, we have Uber. Open up an app. It alleviated a major pain point of having to remember or not knowing the taxi phone number in a various city. That's what you need to look at in academics as well. We all know the pain points when working clinically. It's the PEs, it's the subtle epidural abscess with that low back pain, it's the subtle meningismus in a kid. Are they sick? Are they not sick? Those are pain points. But in academics, there's tons and tons of pain points as well. And I can tell you that when you're dealing with an IRB, pain point, editorial boards, program committees in terms of national lectures and presentations, promotion and tenure, a lot of pain points. And as a leader among your peers and in your group, one of the most important things that you can do is remove those barriers for those pain points. A perfect example, I put hours and hours and hours into an article that I submitted to the Journal of Emergency Medicine. It was flat out rejected with like prejudice. It was like comments, this might be the worst paper that we have ever seen come across our editorial desk. Devastated, downtrodden, sine wave at the bottom. Went to spoke with one of the senior members of our faculty, and I'm like, man, I just got grilled on this paper. And he's like, well, I think it's a good paper. He's like, why don't you send a note, an email, to the editor-in-chief and ask them what they were looking for, because I still think this is an important topic. And I'm like, as a junior faculty member, I can email an editor of a journal, and they'll respond to me. And sure enough, emailed the editor, responded, and said, it's not the paper, the writing, it's you're not hitting on what our audience wants to hear. And if you change and include these 6 points, I can guarantee you this will get accepted. Sure enough, a couple months later, accepted for publication. It was someone telling me how to remove an important barrier that as a junior faculty member, I had no idea how to overcome myself. Generating promoters. Now, this is a very interesting point. Now, if you have been to get your work done on your car recently, one of the questions that almost every dealership will ask you is, you're going to get a survey in the next couple of days, and they're going to ask how we did customer service-wise on a scale of 1 to 10. And if we are not a 9 or 10, in your mind, let us know now. Why? Because their reimbursement from Honda of America, Hyundai of America, Mercedes of America depends on 9s and 10s. Why? Principled in business. They've done a lot of research on this, and what you want to do in everything, in business, but most importantly in our programs and our shops, is you want to generate promoters. Whether it's within your programs, among the dean's office, among the hospital, you want people to look at emergency medicine and be like, they're 10s. They have figured this out. They know how to do a good job. On the converse side, when people are rating you like a 6 or 7 on that 10-point scale, not so good. They're passively satisfied. They're okay. They're not going to complain, but they're actually not going to go like find other people and say, emergency medicine is so great. Honda is awesome. You've got to buy a Honda. They take such good care of you. That's what the 9s and 10s do. It's no different than our NRC picker scores in a way. So the important thing is, whatever you're doing, whatever decisions you're making as a team, make sure that you're generating promoters. It's important in the recruiting season. It's important among the hospital, important among the dean's office as well. And it's a simple question, scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that you would recommend rentacars.com to a friend? The only question that matters, those 50-page surveys don't make a difference. Managing your state. There's a physician at our group always talks about the importance. We hit on this before. If you come in throwing around charts at the beginning of your shift, you're not taking the role of a leader in your org. Brings us back to the fishbowl. And an important point from the business literature is they have this whole concept of the takers versus the givers. Who here has ever worked with a boss who is a taker? They're really not interested. Thank you for volunteering again. They're really not interested in your success. They're interested, well, money's coming down from the hospital CEO. I'm awesome. That comes to me, and I'll distribute a little bit to you all. That's being a taker, as opposed to being a giver where someone genuinely wants to support and nurture and raise the level of the whole group. Make sure that you're a giver in everything that you do and you look out for and contribute to the success of others. Culture, such a huge thing. And I'll give you one perfect example of culture. My wife's an attorney. I got a lot of great stories about attorneys, all endorsed by my wife. So one of the first things I did in this leadership course is they matched us with an executive coach. I didn't even know what an executive coach was, but it was pretty cool. Got to sit down with somebody who's basically like a therapist who didn't prescribe medications. Great opportunity. We talked through, tell me about your mother, tell me about your family. And I'm like, well, my wife's an attorney. He's like, oh, interesting. He's like, our company has actually been contracted by several law firms to give lessons on how to make it a healthier culture and a better workplace. And I'm like, that's great. What firms have you worked with? Maybe you've worked with my wife's firm. He's like, no law firm after we give our presentation has ever hired us. And I'm like, wow, like that's fascinating. And I'm like, let me explore that further. Why is that? He's like, well, we always go, we give the pitch to the senior partners and the senior leaders, and they say, done, we'll pay for it, start coming. And the company says, well, this is executive coaching, and we know from our years and years of experience and from the literature that all culture emanates from the top. So you, as the senior leaders of this firm, need to be involved in this process as well. And every time they say, no, this is not for us, we're fine. This is for our people. Like, do this for our associates. They're the ones who need it. We're healthy. We're good. And they say, we're not going to work with you unless you're willing to change. Because this culture, this organization isn't going to change unless it emanates from the top. Focusing on the vision, I can tell you, so important to always look at what your core vision is. Most residency programs have a vision. Medical schools have a vision. Always tie things back to the vision. And it all gets back to what they teach you in business school, Johnson & Johnson. Company that was started, 1940s. They created a vision back in 1943, which is the moral compass for that company. And in good times and bad times, they always get back to that guiding vision. Why is it that we're here? We believe our first responsibility is to the doctors, nurses, and patients, to mothers and fathers, and all others who use our products and services. Bam. When they're at shareholder meetings, when they're with the board of directors, they always focus on the vision. So make sure when you're forming your team, in your department, in your program, you have a good vision of what it is that you do. We want to be the best program on the East Coast, caring for patients, creating the next generation of leaders and lifelong learners. Whatever that vision is, always think about that with every meeting, every decision that's made. Point number 9, keep an adaptive mindset. iPhones and Google. Now, the reason I relay this is that I heard a great story from one of the business school professors. They were invited to speak at a large company in the Pacific Northwest, which is involved with computer software. Now, this particular professor had an iPhone. And this company in the Pacific Northwest said, we notice you have an iPhone. Before you get up and speak with 2,000 of our associates, you power down your iPhone, you put it under the table. We don't want you showing it to anyone. We don't want anyone looking at it. We don't want people to know that you own an iPhone, because we're paying you as a consultant here at this company, and we don't want competing products. And she's like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Like, I can't even have my iPhone here. So this same professor was invited to give a talk at Google. Showed up at Google, room of 3,000 people, and she starts powering down her iPhone and putting it in her back pocket. And the CEO at Google was like, what are you doing that for? She's like, I thought that's how companies that were competing tech products rolled. And they're like, no, we don't care. Put it on top. Like, you can give your presentation from your iPhone as far as we're concerned. And she got to speaking further with that company, and she said, well, what do you do with employees? Because I heard different things from another company. What do you do with employees that want to buy an iPhone and they work for Google? I said, it's fine. We let them buy iPhones. But we only ask for one thing in return. We ask them to fill out a one-page form. And the one question on that form is, why is that product better than ours? What can we learn from you? Tell us what is driving you to get that product instead of ours. A very adaptive mindset. Listening to others. Healthy dissension, if you will. The Abe Lincoln approach. And it's always important to remember to Uber yourself as a company before you get blockbustered, right? There's not many blockbusters around. They're still out there, but not many. We have a Panera in our main hospital, and I can tell you, I'm a big fan. My colleagues will tell you, a big fan of Panera. And as I was preparing for this talk, I go to Panera to pick up my midnight iced tea, which is a foundational component of any night shift for me. And I look, and even Panera shares their vision. What is Panera's vision? We believe in raising, serving, and eating food that is good and good for you. Everything that happens in that company gets back to that bottom line. And finally, most importantly, work hard and have fun. Academics, leadership, it's a sine wave, and it truly is a marathon. If you try to treat it as a sprint, you try to just check the boxes and cross off things from your list, as we all do when we're working clinically, it's not going to be a very enjoyable process. Laughter is a barometer of a healthy team. I need to get a photo of our leadership team from our group, because I always put together something that's interesting, and I had everyone Simpsonized this past year, coming up with even better things this year. So yeah, I know. So what did we learn? What did we talk about in the last hour? A couple of footnotes. It's important to remember that academics really is a lost leader in many ways. The NIH salary cap, $190,000, much different than most emergency physician salaries that are out there. The amount of money that comes back from Medicare for GME reimbursement, threatened all the time. Undergraduate medical education with the dean's tax, not that much money comes back to the department. But we all know what we do is critical to our mission. I can't tell you how many times at meetings in our organization, I get back to the company's mission of being a trusted leader in caring for patients and advancing health. And I use their own words to our benefit as academics. If you want to advance health, these are things that we have to invest in. There's only a couple of ways of advancing health that I know of, and it's through research, it's scholarship, it's academics, and it's education. That's it. We have to invest in this infrastructure. Not everything that is valuable, though, can be measured. And a lot of administrators like to see measurements in metrics. So do whatever you can to make what you're achieving as a group valuable and try to demonstrate it in whichever ways, whether it's lack of citations from the RRC or a great recruiting year that you had or a list of publications and presentations at a national meeting. Money is cheap, time and talent are priceless. Don't quote me on that one, but I think it's a great quote. Think like a leader, not like an employee. Think of ways, not being the victim as an employee, but ways that you as a leader within that system can actually make the system more valuable. Make it meaningful, make it impactful, and make it valuable. So we've reached the end of our roadmap, hit our goals and objectives. Our 10 lessons, just to recap, just get over yourself. We often can be our largest hurdle. Tee up others for success. Remember the Dave Matthews Band. Open door, open dialogue. Identify and alleviate pain points. Generate promoters. You never want to be rated a 1 or 2 on a 10-point scale when 9s and 10s are what counts. Manage your state. Everyone is watching everything that you do. Craft the culture. Focus on that vision and always try to tie back to that vision. Keep that adaptive mindset. iPhones at Google are not a bad thing. We want to learn why others are utilizing that. And finally, work hard, have fun in the process. So the academic leader in a nutshell provides opportunities, stimulates ideas, and removes barriers. I'll go ahead and conclude there. I thank you very much for your time and your kind attention.